The blood on Hannah Everett's hands would not wash clean, no matter how hard she scrubbed, though the doctor had assured her it was only pig's blood from the butcher shop where she worked 14 hours a day. Hannah stood at the basin in the boarding house, watching her reflection fracture in the rippling water as her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the soap. It was 1882, and Evanston, Wyoming, had become her refuge after fleeing Ohio. But refuge felt like too generous a word for the suffocating existence she endured here. "That girl needs someone patient," Mrs. Crawford's voice drifted through the thin walls. "She jumps at every sound, won't look a man in the eye, and I swear she counts every breath like she might run out." Hannah pressed her wet palms against her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. The nightmares still came every time she closed her eyes, visions of her father's gambling debts and the men who had come to collect, men who had looked at her like she was currency. She had run, stolen money from her mother's cookie jar, and bought a train ticket west. And now she was 22 years old and utterly alone in a town that whispered about her strangeness. Patient? That was Mr. Henderson from the general store. "That girl's broken, Martha. Ain't no amount of patience gonna fix whatever's wrong with her." Hannah grabbed her shawl and slipped out the back door before anyone could see her tears. The October air bit at her cheeks as she hurried down the darkening street toward the edge of town. She did not know where she was going, only that she needed to breathe, needed to escape the walls that seemed to close in tighter every day. Her boots kicked up dust on the road leading out toward the mountains, those vast peaks that promised something beyond this trapped feeling. She walked until her legs ached, until the lights of Evanston were distant pinpricks behind her. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver across the landscape. Hannah sat on a fallen log and finally let herself cry, great gasping sobs that felt like they would tear her apart. She was so tired of being afraid, so exhausted from pretending she was fine when every moment felt like walking on glass. The sound of footsteps made her freeze. Her breath caught as a massive figure emerged from the tree line, and for one terrifying second, every nightmare came rushing back. But then the moonlight caught his features, and she saw he was not approaching her with menace, but with careful, measured steps, as though approaching a wounded animal. Evening, miss." His voice was deep as distant thunder, surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. "Did not mean to startle you. Heard someone crying and wanted to make sure everything was all right." Hannah scrambled to her feet, wiping at her face with shaking hands. The man before her was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed impossibly broad beneath his worn leather jacket. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent their life in the elements. Thick arms, corded with muscle, showed beneath rolled-up sleeves despite the cold, and his hands were the size of dinner plates. Everything about him screamed danger, yet his eyes held something soft, something careful. "I'm fine," Hannah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She took an instinctive step backward. The man stopped moving immediately, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "All right, that is all right. I will just head back to my cabin then, but I should mention, you are pretty far from town, and there are wolves in these parts at night. Would you like me to walk you back, keeping a good distance, of course?" "Wolves?" Hannah's eyes widened, darting to the dark tree line. "I would not let anything hurt you," the man said simply. "Name's Thomas Novak. I live up in the mountains, trap and hunt, bring pelts and meat down to Evanston every few weeks. You are Hannah from the butcher shop, right? Seen you there when I bring my game in." Hannah nodded slowly. She had seen him, this giant of a man who always moved with surprising gentleness, who spoke quietly to old Mr. Peterson at the shop and always said please and thank you. She had been too afraid to look at him directly, but she had noticed. "I can walk myself back," Hannah said, though her voice lacked conviction. The idea of wolves made her stomach turn with fresh fear. Thomas nodded. "Then I will just happen to be walking the same direction, about 20 paces behind. That work for you?" There was something in his tone, something that said he understood her fear without needing explanation. Hannah started walking, and true to his word, Thomas followed at a distance that felt safe. She could hear his steady footfalls, could sense his presence like a warm shield at her back. When they reached the edge of town, he stopped. "Sleep well, Miss Hannah," he called softly. "You're safe now." Hannah turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time. In the moonlight, he looked like something out of a storybook, some legendary protector carved from mountain stone. "Thank you," she whispered. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a small salute, then turned and disappeared back into the darkness. For the first time in months, Hannah slept without nightmares that night. 3 days later, Thomas appeared at the butcher shop with 2 deer slung over his massive shoulders as though they weighed nothing. Hannah was scrubbing the counter, her hands red and raw from the cold water and harsh soap. She heard the door open and looked up, her breath catching when she saw him. "Morning," Thomas said to Mr. Peterson. "Brought you some prime venison." "Excellent, excellent," the old butcher beamed. "Hannah, help me get these to the back." Hannah's hands started shaking immediately. The blood, the smell, the weight of dead things. She forced herself to move, to grab one of the deer's legs, but her vision started tunneling at the edges. Suddenly, Thomas was there, gently moving her hand away. "I have got it," he said quietly, his voice pitched just for her. "Why do not you get the door?" It was such a simple thing, but it felt like being thrown a rope while drowning. Hannah nodded and hurried to open the back door, grateful to step into the fresh air. Thomas carried both deer as though they were children, laying them carefully on the work table. Mr. Peterson was already discussing prices, but Thomas kept glancing at Hannah, concern evident in his dark eyes. "Miss Hannah," he said when there was a pause in conversation, "I found some wild sage up in the hills. Real good for making tea, settles the nerves. Would you like some?" Hannah blinked, surprised. Yes, that would be kind." From his pack, Thomas produced a cloth bundle tied with twine. "Steep it in hot water for about 5 minutes. My mother swore by it, said it was better than any medicine." Their fingers brushed when she took the bundle, and Hannah felt warmth spread up her arm. His hands were calloused and scarred, but his touch had been impossibly gentle. "Thank you, Mr. Novak." "Thomas," he corrected with a small smile. "Mr. Novak was my father." Over the following weeks, Thomas started appearing in town more frequently. He always had some reason, some legitimate business, but Hannah began to notice that his errands often brought him past the butcher shop around the time she took her afternoon break. He never approached her directly, never made her feel cornered or uncomfortable. But he was there. A steady, solid presence. One particularly difficult day, when a drunk cowboy had grabbed Hannah's wrist in the shop and she had frozen completely, unable to move or speak or defend herself, Thomas had been there. He had walked in, taken one look at the situation, and simply placed his massive hand on the cowboy's shoulder. "Let her go," Thomas had said, his voice perfectly calm but carrying an undertone of absolute authority. The cowboy had released her immediately, mumbling apologies and stumbling out. Hannah had stood there shaking, her wrist throbbing, tears streaming down her face. Thomas had not touched her, had not moved closer, but had stayed there until her breathing slowed. "You are safe," he had said, the same words he had spoken that first night. "I'm right here, and you are safe." Mr. Peterson had given Hannah the rest of the day off, and she had fled to her room at the boarding house. An hour later, Mrs. Crawford knocked on her door. "That mountain man left something for you," she said, her voice filled with curiosity. "Says it might help." It was a small wooden box carved with intricate designs of mountains and trees. Inside was a note in surprisingly elegant handwriting. "For when the world gets too loud, you can squeeze this instead." Wrapped in cloth was a smooth riverstone, perfectly sized for a hand, worn soft by water and time. Hannah held the stone and cried, but this time the tears felt different, felt almost like relief. Winter came early to Wyoming that year, bringing heavy snows that turned Evanston into a white fortress. Hannah struggled with the cold, with the way it made her already anxious mind fixate on all the ways she might freeze, might starve, might die alone. The boarding house was drafty, and her room was the coldest since it faced north. She wore every piece of clothing she owned to bed, and still shivered through the nights. Thomas came to town less frequently when the snows were heavy, but when he did come, he always stopped by the butcher shop. One December morning, when the temperature had dropped so low that the water in the basin had frozen solid, he arrived with a large bundle under his arm. "Morning, Hannah," he said, having dropped the formality of Miss weeks ago with her quiet permission. "Made something for you." He unrolled the bundle to reveal a thick fur blanket, beautifully worked and obviously crafted with skill. Bear fur, he explained. Warmest thing you can get. Thought you might need it, the way Mrs. Crawford complains about the heating bills. Hannah stared at the blanket, at the hours of work it represented, at the thoughtfulness behind it. I cannot accept this, she whispered. It is too much. It is just sitting in my cabin otherwise, Thomas said easily. I have more than I need, and I would rest easier knowing you were warm. No obligation, no strings, just a blanket. But it was not just a blanket. They both knew it. It was a statement, a question, an offering of something neither of them had quite named yet. Thank you, Hannah said, reaching out to touch the soft fur. This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me. Thomas's expression softened. You deserve kindness, Hannah. I hope you know that. That night, wrapped in the bare fur blanket that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke, Hannah slept deeply for the first time since arriving in Wyoming. She dreamed of mountains and safety, of a deep voice saying her name like it was something precious. Christmas came, and the town celebrated with a dance at the community hall. Hannah had no intention of going until Mrs. Crawford insisted, saying that young women needed to socialize. The noise and crowd made Hannah's skin crawl, and she pressed herself against the wall, looking for an escape route. Then she saw Thomas standing near the door, looking equally uncomfortable in a clean shirt and vest that could barely contain his broad shoulders. Their eyes met across the room, and he smiled. It transformed his rugged face, made him look younger, more approachable. He started making his way toward her, and Hannah felt her heart do something strange in her chest, something that was not fear. Did not take you for the dancing type, she said when he reached her, raising her voice to be heard over the fiddle music. I am not, Thomas admitted, but I heard you might be here, and I thought you might like a friendly face in the crowd. You came to a dance you did not want to attend because I might be here? Hannah asked, something warm blooming in her chest. Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, looking sheepish. When you say it like that, it sounds a bit foolish. No, Hannah said quickly. It sounds nice, really nice. They stood together against the wall, not dancing, but not alone either. Thomas told her about his cabin in the mountains, about the deer that came to drink from the stream behind it, about the eagles that nested in the high peaks. Hannah told him about the books she loved to read, about her dream of maybe someday having a garden, about how she used to sketch before her hands got too shaky. Why did they get shaky? Thomas asked gently. Hannah looked at her hands, at the scars on her wrists that her sleeves usually covered. I ran away from something bad, she said quietly, and I think part of me is still running, even though I am standing still. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I understand that, he finally said. My father had a terrible temper, used to knock me and my mother around when he had been drinking. I left when I was 16, came out here to the mountains where there was space to breathe. That was 12 years ago, and sometimes I still flinch at loud noises. Hannah looked up at him, this giant of a man admitting to fear, and felt something shift inside her. Does it get better? Yes, Thomas said firmly. Slowly, but yes, especially when you have got good reasons to get better, good people around you. Like your mother? Hannah asked. She passed 5 years back, Thomas said, his voice heavy with old grief. But yes, like her, she was the strongest person I ever knew. And like you, he added, meeting Hannah's eyes, I think you are stronger than you know. Before Hannah could respond, a drunk miner stumbled into her, sloshing whiskey on her dress. She gasped and jerked back, her body going rigid with panic. The miner started to apologize, but his large presence and alcohol-heavy breath sent Hannah spiraling. Her vision tunneled, her breath coming in short gasps, and she could not think, could not move. Hannah, Thomas's voice cut through the panic, steady as bedrock. Look at me, just me, nobody else. She found his eyes, those dark, steady eyes, and held on like they were a lifeline. That is it, Thomas said softly. Now breathe with me, in through your nose. He demonstrated, slow and exaggerated. Out through your mouth. Hannah matched his breathing, once, twice, 3 times. The panic started to recede like a wave pulling back from shore. There you go, Thomas said. You want to leave? Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. Thomas offered his arm, not touching her, but providing an anchor if she needed it. She rested her fingertips on his forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric, and let him guide her through the crowd and out into the cold night air. Outside, away from the noise and bodies, Hannah gulped in deep breaths of icy air. I am sorry, she whispered. I am sorry I am like this." "Hey," Thomas said firmly, ducking his head to look into her eyes. "You've got nothing to apologize for. You hear me? Nothing." "Everyone thinks I am broken," Hannah said, the words spilling out. "They whisper about it, about how I am strange, about how no man will ever want someone as damaged as me." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then everyone is a fool. Hannah, you are not broken. You are wounded, and that is different. Wounds can heal." "Mrs. Crawford said I need someone patient," Hannah said with a bitter laugh, "like I am some kind of project to be endured." "Good," Thomas said, his voice carrying such conviction that Hannah looked up in surprise. "I've got all the patience in the world for you." The words hung in the cold air between them, full of meaning and promise. Hannah stared at him, this man who had shown her nothing but gentleness, who had never asked for anything in return, who looked at her like she was something valuable. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you be patient with me?" Thomas reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was warm despite the cold, and Hannah found herself leaning into the touch. "Because when I look at you, I see someone brave enough to run toward a new life even when she was terrified," Thomas said. "I see someone who works herself to the bone every day despite her fear. I see someone who has been hurt but still has kindness in her eyes. And I see someone I would very much like to know better, if she will let me." Hannah felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I do not know how to be with someone, how to trust, how to not be afraid all the time." "That is all right," Thomas said, using his thumb to gently wipe away her tears. "We will figure it out together. No rush, no pressure. We will just take it one day at a time, at whatever pace you need. I am not going anywhere." "You promise?" Hannah asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "I promise," Thomas said. "I am a patient man, Hannah, and you are worth waiting for." Hannah took a shaky breath and did something she had not done in years. She chose to trust. "Will you tell me more about your cabin, about the mountains?" Thomas smiled, that transforming smile, and began to talk. He told her about the view from his porch, about the way the sunrise painted the peaks gold, about the hot spring he had found where the water bubbled up warm even in winter. Hannah listened and felt something inside her begin to unknot, begin to relax. They talked until the cold became unbearable, and when Thomas walked her back to the boarding house, Hannah felt lighter than she had in months. At her door, Thomas tipped his head. "Sleep well, Hannah. I will see you when I come to town next week." "Wait," Hannah said before he could leave. "Would you want to have coffee when you come to town, at the cafe?" Thomas's smile was brilliant. "I would like that very much." Hannah watched him walk away into the snowy night, and for the first time since running from Ohio, she felt something that might have been hope. The coffee meeting became a regular occurrence. Every time Thomas came to town, he would stop by the butcher shop, complete his business, and then meet Hannah at the small cafe on Main Street. At first, they sat across from each other, a safe distance. Thomas would talk about his week, about the animals he had seen, about the work he was doing on his cabin. Hannah would tell him about the books she was reading, about small improvements in her confidence, about the nightmares that were slowly becoming less frequent. "You are sleeping better?" Thomas asked one afternoon in January, warming his hands on his coffee cup. "Yes," Hannah said. "The blanket helps, and sometimes, when I start to panic, I remember what you said about breathing. It helps too." "Good," Thomas said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "That is real good, Hannah." "Tell me about your mother," Hannah said suddenly. "You said she was strong." Thomas's expression grew distant but fond. "She was from a farming family in Nebraska. Met my father when he was working the harvest. Thought he was charming. By the time she realized his temper, she was already married with a baby on the way. But she did not let it break her. She taught me to read and write, told me stories every night, made sure I knew I was loved, and when I was old enough, she told me to go, to find a better life than the one she could give me." "You must miss her terribly," Hannah said softly. "Every day," Thomas admitted, "but I try to live in a way that would make her proud. She always said the measure of a man was how he treated people who could not fight back, people who were vulnerable. That has stuck with me." Hannah thought about her own mother, who had looked the other way when her father had talked about selling Hannah off to cover his debts. "My mother was not like that," she said quietly. "She chose him over me, every time." Thomas reached across the table, slowly, and rested his hand palm up on the wood. An invitation, not a demand. Hannah looked at his hand, scarred and calloused, and after a moment she placed her own hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers, warm and secure. "Then she was a fool," Thomas said firmly, "and you deserved better." They sat like that, hands joined across the table until their coffee grew cold. It was a small thing, holding hands, but for Hannah it felt monumental. She was touching someone without fear, trusting someone with this small vulnerability, and the world had not ended. Over the next several weeks, their relationship deepened in small increments. Thomas started bringing Hannah little gifts when he came to town. A perfectly smooth piece of driftwood, a book he had traded for at the general store, a jar of honey from wild bees. Hannah started sketching again, her hands steadier than they had been in years, and she drew pictures of mountains for Thomas, folding them carefully for him to take back to his cabin. One February morning, Thomas arrived in town during a blizzard. The snow was coming down so heavily that visibility was nearly zero, and the wind howled like a living thing. Hannah had just finished her shift at the butcher shop when Thomas appeared, covered in snow and ice. "What are you doing here?" Hannah gasped. "You should not have traveled in this weather." "I needed to make sure you were all right," Thomas said, brushing snow from his hair. "This storm came up sudden, and I know how bad weather makes you anxious." Hannah felt her heart swell. He had risked the dangerous journey just to check on her. "I'm all right," she said, "scared, but all right." "The passes will be snowed in by now," Thomas said, looking out at the white wall of the storm. "I will have to stay in town until it clears, maybe impose on the hospitality of the hotel." "Or," Hannah said, surprising herself with her boldness, "you could stay at the boarding house. Mrs. Crawford has an extra room, and you could be close by if I need you." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes. "You want me close by?" "Yes," Hannah said simply. "I feel safer when you are near." Thomas smiled, that wonderful transforming smile. "Then I will stay at the boarding house." Meow. Crawford was delighted to rent her spare room to Thomas, especially when he paid double her asking price without haggling. The storm raged for 3 days, trapping everyone indoors. Hannah should have been terrified, should have been climbing the walls with anxiety, but with Thomas in the next room, she felt oddly calm. They spent the days in the boarding house parlor, along with the other residents. Thomas told stories that had everyone laughing, tales of misadventures in the mountains and close calls with wildlife. Hannah watched him, this giant of a man who was so gentle with people, who helped Mrs. Crawford carry firewood without being asked, who patiently taught old Mr. Wilson a card game to pass the time. She saw the way children were drawn to him, how he would let them hang on his massive arms like he was a tree to be climbed. She saw his kindness, his strength, his goodness, and felt herself falling. On the second night, Hannah had a nightmare. She woke gasping, tangled in her sheets, her heart racing with remembered terror. Without thinking, she grabbed the riverstone from her nightstand and stumbled out into the hallway. Thomas's door was closed, but a thin line of light showed beneath it. Before she could lose her courage, Hannah knocked softly. The door opened immediately, and Thomas stood there in his undershirt and trousers, his hair loose around his shoulders. His eyes widened with concern when he saw her face. "Hannah? What is wrong?" "Bad dream," Hannah whispered, clutching the stone. "I know it is late, but I needed to know someone was there." "I am here," Thomas said immediately. "Come on, let us go downstairs. I will make you some of that sage tea." They went down to the kitchen, moving quietly so as not to wake the other residents. Thomas stoked the fire and put water on to boil, while Hannah sat at the table, slowly coming back to herself. When he placed the tea in front of her, she wrapped her hands around the cup and breathed in the aromatic steam. "Want to talk about it?" Thomas asked, sitting across from her. Hannah hesitated, then decided she was tired of carrying it alone. "I dream about the men my father owed money to. They came to our house, said I could pay off his debt by going with them. My father told me to be reasonable, that it was just for a few years, that I owed him for raising me. My mother said nothing, just stood there with her head down. So I ran. I stole $63 from the kitchen jar and ran in the night. I bought a train ticket and kept going west until I ran out of money. And I dream about them finding me, about being dragged back, about becoming what they wanted me to be." Thomas's face had gone hard as granite. "They will never touch you," he said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. Never. I swear to you, Hannah, as long as I draw breath, no one will hurt you again. You cannot promise that, Hannah said, but she wanted to believe him. Watch me, Thomas said. You are under my protection now, whether you want to call it that or not. Anyone who wants to harm you has to go through me first, and I am not an easy man to go through. Looking at him, at the width of his shoulders and the strength in his arms, at the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, Hannah believed him. Thank you, she whispered. They sat together until dawn, drinking tea and talking quietly. Thomas told her about learning to trap from an old mountain man named Jeremiah, about his first winter alone in the cabin when he thought he might not survive, about the day he realized he was happy in his solitude. Hannah told him about the sister she had left behind, younger by 3 years, about the guilt she carried for leaving her there. Thomas listened without judgment, without trying to fix things, just being present and steady. When the sun rose, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Thomas walked Hannah back to her room. At her door, he reached out and gently touched her cheek. You are so brave, Hannah Everett, he said softly. Braver than you know. I do not feel brave, Hannah admitted. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Thomas said. It is moving forward despite it, and you do that every single day. Hannah turned her face into his hand, allowing herself this touch, this comfort. I am glad you are here. So am I, Thomas said. Now get some sleep. I will be right next door if you need me. Hannah slept peacefully for the rest of the morning, and when she woke, she found a note slipped under her door. You are safe, you are valued, you are cared for. T. Ting. She pressed the note to her chest and smiled. The storm cleared on the 4th day, revealing a world transformed by snow. Evanston looked like something from a fairy tale, all white drifts and icicles glittering in the sun. Thomas prepared to return to his cabin, packing his supplies and checking his gear. Hannah helped him, moving around him with a comfortable familiarity that would have been impossible a few months ago. I will be back in 2 weeks, Thomas said as he shouldered his pack. Unless you need me sooner, you can send word with anyone heading into the mountains and I will come. 2 weeks feels like a long time, Hannah said, surprising herself with her honesty. Thomas set down his pack and turned to face her fully. Hannah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. No worrying about my feelings or what you think I want to hear. Just the truth. Hannah nodded, her heart beginning to race. Do you have feelings for me? Thomas asked directly. Because I have feelings for you, strong ones, and I need to know if this is just friendship to you or if it might be something more. Hannah looked at this man who had shown her such patience, such kindness, such unwavering steadiness. She thought about how her heart lifted when she saw him, how safe she felt in his presence, how the world seemed more manageable when he was near. She thought about his smile, his gentle hands, his rumbling laugh, and she knew her answer. It is more, she said, her voice shaking but certain. I have feelings for you too, Thomas, strong ones. You scare me a little, not because of who you are, but because of how much I am starting to need you. But yes, it is definitely more than friendship. Thomas's face broke into a grin that made him look boyish despite his size and the weathering of his features. Thank God, he said. I have been half in love with you since that first night when you sat crying on that log and still managed to be polite to a strange mountain man. Half in love? Hannah asked, a smile tugging at her own lips. Well, fully in love now, Thomas admitted. But I was trying not to come on too strong. Hannah laughed, actually laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. You? Intimidating? You are the gentlest person I have ever met. Only with you, Thomas said. With you, I want to be gentle. I want to be everything you need. Hannah stepped closer, closing some of the distance between them. What I need is time, she said honestly. Time to get comfortable with this, with us. I want this, want you, but I need to go slowly. Then, slowly is what we will do, Thomas said. At your pace, always. Can I write to you while I am at the cabin? I am not much of a writer, but I would like to stay in touch. I would like that, Hannah said. I will write back. Thomas reached out and took her hand, lifting it to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and sweet, and it made Hannah's breath catch. 2 weeks, he said, and then I will be back. Hannah watched him walk out of town, his figure growing smaller against the vast white landscape. She touched her knuckles where he had kissed them, and felt the flutter of something that might have been joy. The letters started arriving a week later, delivered by a trapper named Caleb, who passed through the mountains regularly. Thomas's handwriting was careful and neat, his words simple but heartfelt. He told her about his days, about the work of maintaining his traplines, about the books he was reading by firelight. He told her he thought of her often, that her sketches were tacked up on his cabin wall, that he was counting the days until he could see her again. Hannah wrote back, her own letters growing longer and more open with each one. She told him about her progress at work, about how she had managed to speak up when a customer tried to cheat Mr. Peterson, about the wildflowers she was planting for her imaginary garden. She told him she missed him, that she looked forward to his visits, that she was learning to trust the feelings growing in her heart. When Thomas returned to town in March, Hannah was waiting at the edge of the settlement. She had told herself she would not do this, would not wait like some lovesick girl, but when the day came, she found her feet carrying her to the road of their own accord. When she saw his tall figure cresting the hill, his pack on his back and his long stride eating up the distance, her heart soared. Thomas saw her, and his pace increased. When he reached her, he dropped his pack and opened his arms, a question in his eyes. Hannah did not hesitate. She walked into his embrace, letting his strong arms enfold her, feeling his warmth and solidity. It was the first time she had initiated a hug since leaving Ohio, and it felt like coming home. "I missed you," she said into his chest, her voice muffled by his jacket. "Missed you too," Thomas rumbled, his arms tightening gently around her. "Every damn day." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other on the road to town, and Hannah felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. This man, this feeling, this was what she had been running toward all along, even when she thought she was just running away. Over the following months, their relationship blossomed. Thomas started spending more time in town, taking odd jobs to justify his presence. He helped repair the church roof, worked at the livery stable, and even assisted Mr. Peterson at the butcher shop. Hannah bloomed under his steady presence, growing more confident and more herself. Her smiles came easier, her laughter rang out more frequently, and the shadows in her eyes began to recede. By May, the whole town knew they were courting, and opinions were mixed. Some people thought Hannah was lucky to have caught the attention of such a capable man. Others whispered that Thomas was a fool for taking on someone so damaged. Mrs. Crawford fell firmly in the former camp and took to inviting Thomas for dinner regularly, beaming at the couple like a proud mother. One warm evening in June, Thomas asked Hannah if she would like to see his cabin. "No pressure," he said quickly. "We can go during the day, be back before dark. I just thought you might like to see the place I've been telling you about, see if it matches up to how you have been imagining it." Hannah had been curious about his home, about this place that had shaped him. "I would like that," she said. "When? Tomorrow?" Thomas suggested. "I will bring the horses, pack a lunch. We can make a day of it." The next morning dawned clear and beautiful. Thomas arrived with 2 horses, one a massive gelding that could carry his weight, the other a gentler mare, perfect for Hannah. He helped her mount, his hands steady on her waist, and then they were off, heading into the mountains. The ride took 2 hours, following a narrow trail that wound through pine forests and along rushing streams. Hannah had been nervous about the journey, about being so far from town, but with Thomas riding beside her, pointing out landmarks and telling stories, her anxiety remained manageable. The higher they climbed, the more spectacular the views became. Mountains rose around them in majestic peaks, their tops still dusted with snow despite the summer heat in the valleys. Finally, they broke through a line of trees, and Hannah gasped. Thomas's cabin sat in a small clearing, backed against a cliff face with a view that stretched for miles. The cabin itself was solidly built from logs with a stone chimney and a wide porch. Behind it, she could see the hot spring he had mentioned, steam rising gently from the water. It was beautiful, isolated, peaceful. "Welcome to my home," Thomas said, dismounting and coming to help her down. His hands spanned her waist easily, and he lowered her to the ground with care. Hannah turned slowly, taking it all in. "Thomas, this is incredible. It is like something from a dream." He smiled, pleased by her reaction. "Come on, let me show you inside." The cabin's interior was neat and surprisingly comfortable. A large bed occupied one corner, covered with furs. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area beside it. Shelves held books, supplies, and Hannah's sketches, carefully preserved and displayed. A table and chairs sat near the window, positioned to take advantage of the view. Everything spoke of a man who lived simply, but with purpose. "You kept all my drawings," Hannah said, touching one of the sketches gently. "Of course I did," Thomas said. "They are beautiful. You were talented, Hannah." They had lunch on the porch, eating bread and cheese and dried apples while looking out at the vista. Thomas pointed out the path to his traplines, the place where he had once seen a grizzly, the peak he had climbed one summer just to see if he could. Hannah told him about her dream of having a garden, about the vegetables and flowers she would plant if she had the space. "You could have a garden here," Thomas said casually. "The soil is good, plenty of water from the stream. Eastern side of the cabin gets full sun most of the day." Hannah looked at him, her heart beginning to pound. "Are you asking me something, Thomas Novak?" Thomas set down his food and turned to face her fully. "I'm getting around to it," he said. "I know we have only been courting for a few months, and I know you need time. But Hannah, I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you sketch when you think no one is watching and how you hum while you work. I love that you are learning to trust again, and I am honored that you trust me. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Are you proposing?" "Not yet," Thomas said gently. "I'm telling you my intentions, giving you time to get used to the idea. When I propose, it will be because I know you are ready to say yes, and because we both know this is what we want. But I wanted you to know where my heart is, where this is heading if you want it to go there." Hannah reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I want it to go there," she said. "I am not ready yet, but I want it. I want a life with you, Thomas. I want to wake up to these mountains every morning. I want to plant a garden and draw pictures and learn to be happy. I want all of it with you." Thomas brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles just like that first time. "Then we will get there together, one day at a time. No rush." They spent the afternoon exploring the area around the cabin. Thomas showed her the hot spring, the water clear and inviting. "It is warm year-round," he explained. "Stays about the same temperature even in the dead of winter. It is private here, good for bathing or just soaking sore muscles." Hannah could imagine it, living here with Thomas, soaking in the hot spring under the stars. The image felt right, felt possible in a way that nothing had in years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Thomas reluctantly said they needed to head back to town. "I promised to have you back before dark," he said, "and I keep my promises." The ride back was comfortable, both of them quiet and content. When they reached Evanston, Thomas walked Hannah to the boarding house. At the door, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "It means the world to me that you saw my home, that you could picture a future there." "Thank you for showing me," Hannah said, "for sharing that part of your life with me." Thomas leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well, Hannah. I will see you tomorrow." Hannah touched her forehead where his lips had been and smiled. Tomorrow. Summer passed in a golden haze. Hannah continued to grow stronger, more confident. She started saying no when customers at the butcher shop became too demanding, started advocating for herself in small but meaningful ways. Thomas was there through it all, a steady presence who celebrated her victories and supported her through the setbacks. They spent every possible moment together, walking through town, having picnics by the river, talking for hours about everything and nothing. In August, Thomas took Hannah to meet Caleb, the trapper who delivered their letters. Caleb was an older man, grizzled and weather-beaten, but with kind eyes. He looked Hannah over carefully when Thomas introduced her. "So you are the woman who finally tamed Thomas Novak," Caleb said with a toothy grin. "I did not tame him," Hannah said, finding her voice. "I just appreciated him as he is." Caleb laughed. "I like her, Thomas. She has got spirit." "She does," Thomas agreed, his eyes warm on Hannah, "more than she knows." September brought the first hints of autumn, the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. Thomas had been gone for a week, checking his trap lines and preparing for the coming winter. Hannah missed him terribly, but found that the missing was different now, less desperate and more bittersweet. She knew he would return, trusted it in her bones. When he came back to town, he was carrying something wrapped in cloth. He found Hannah at the butcher shop during her afternoon break and asked her to take a walk with him. They went to the little park at the edge of town, sitting on their usual bench beneath a cottonwood tree. "I made you something," Thomas said, unwrapping the bundle. Inside was a beautiful wooden box, similar to the first one he had given her, but larger. The carving was exquisite, showing a mountain landscape with a tiny cabin nestled among trees. "Open it." Hannah opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a ring. Not gold or silver, but carved from wood, sanded smooth and oiled until it gleamed. It was simple and beautiful and perfect. "Hannah Everett," Thomas said, taking the ring from the box and holding it carefully. "I know I said I would wait until you were ready, and if you need more time, that is all right. But these past months with you have been the best of my life, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. I love you more than I have words to say. Will you marry me? Will you come live in the mountains with me and build a life together?" Hannah looked at the ring, at Thomas's hopeful face, at the love shining in his eyes. She thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in Evanston, terrified and broken. She thought about the woman she was becoming, stronger and braver with each passing day. She thought about Thomas's patience, his kindness, his unwavering support, and she knew her answer. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." Thomas's whoop of joy startled birds from the trees. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, really kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Hannah felt like she was finally, truly home. They were married on a crisp October morning, with the whole town in attendance. Hannah wore a simple dress in pale blue that Mrs. Crawford had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Thomas had picked that morning. Thomas wore his best shirt and vest, his hair tied back, looking nervous and happy and handsome. The ceremony was held in the small church, with Reverend Thomas officiating. When it came time for vows, Thomas spoke in a voice that rang with conviction. "Hannah, I vow to be patient with you always, to support you through the hard days and celebrate with you through the good ones. I vow to protect you, to make you laugh, to be the steady ground beneath your feet. I vow to love you with everything I am, for all my days." Hannah's voice shook but did not break. "Thomas, I vow to trust you, to let you in even when it scares me. I vow to build a life with you in those mountains, to grow alongside you, to love you with all the courage I can find. You have shown me that I am more than my fear, more than my past, and I vow to become the woman you already see when you look at me." There was not a dry eye in the church. The town threw them a small reception with food and music and dancing. Hannah danced with Thomas for the first time, his strong arms guiding her through the steps, and she laughed with pure joy. When it was time to leave, the whole town lined up to wish them well. Even the people who had whispered about Hannah being broken seemed genuinely happy for them. Thomas and Hannah rode up to the cabin as the sun was setting, arriving in full darkness. Thomas had left lanterns burning, and the cabin glowed with warm light. He helped Hannah down from her horse and, without warning, swept her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" Hannah laughed. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Thomas said, shouldering open the door. "It is tradition." He set her down gently in the middle of the cabin, their cabin now. Hannah turned slowly, seeing it with new eyes. This was her home, their home. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "Welcome home, Mrs. Novak," he murmured. "Mrs. Novak," Hannah repeated, testing out the name. "I like that. I like that very much." That night, Thomas was everything Hannah needed him to be. Patient, gentle, attentive. He took his time, letting her set the pace, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When Hannah had moments of panic, flashes of old fear, Thomas would stop immediately, holding her and reminding her where she was, who she was with, that she was safe. And slowly, carefully, Hannah learned that physical intimacy could be beautiful, could be something shared rather than something taken. She learned that with the right person, with trust and patience and love, even her deepest wounds could begin to heal. Afterward, lying in Thomas's arms beneath the warm furs, Hannah felt a peace she had never experienced before. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Thomas asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "For waiting, for being patient, for loving me enough to let me heal at my own pace." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "I told you I had all the patience in the world for you. I meant it." "I know," Hannah said, "and that has made all the difference." The first winter in the mountains was an adjustment. Hannah had to learn how to live in such isolation, how to manage when Thomas was away checking his trap lines, how to keep the cabin warm and the food supplies organized. But she also discovered strengths she had not known she possessed. She learned to snowshoe, to identify animal tracks, to cook over an open fire. She spent her days drawing, reading, and planning her garden for spring. And when Thomas was home, they would spend long evenings talking, making love, simply enjoying each other's presence. The nightmares became less frequent. Hannah would still have bad nights, would still wake up gasping and afraid, but now Thomas was there to hold her, to remind her she was safe, and more often she slept peacefully through the night. Spring came, and with it, Hannah's garden. Thomas helped her break ground and build raised beds. They planted vegetables and herbs, and Hannah added flowers around the borders just because they were beautiful. She spent hours tending her garden, and Thomas would often come home from his work to find her there, dirt on her hands and a smile on her face. "You look happy," he said one afternoon in May, watching her transplant seedlings. "I am happy," Hannah said, realizing it was true. "Truly happy, maybe for the first time in my life." In June, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. Thomas went very still, then let out a whoop that echoed off the mountains. He picked Hannah up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are having a baby." "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Thomas said, setting her down carefully and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything, Hannah, everything I never knew I wanted. A wife, a home, now a child. I love you so much." Hannah covered his hand with hers. "I love you too. And I'm not scared, Thomas. I thought I would be terrified of being a mother, given everything, but with you beside me, I'm not scared at all." The pregnancy was healthy and relatively easy. Thomas was attentive to the point of being overprotective, always making sure Hannah was not overworking herself, that she was eating enough, that she was comfortable. Hannah found it endearing, this big, strong man who fretted over her like she was made of glass. In February, during a rare warm spell, Hannah went into labor. Thomas had brought a midwife up to the cabin a week prior, Mrs. Johansson, an experienced woman who had delivered dozens of babies. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Hannah thought she could not do it, when the pain was too much and she wanted to give up. But Thomas was there, holding her hand, wiping her brow, telling her she was strong, she was amazing, she could do this, and she did. Just before dawn, Hannah delivered a healthy baby boy with a powerful set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Thomas cried when Mrs. Johansson placed the baby in his arms, great gasping sobs of joy and wonder. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered, looking down at his son. "Hannah, he is perfect." They named him Jacob, after Thomas's mother's father. Jacob Novak was indeed perfect, all 10 fingers and 10 toes, with his mother's eyes and his father's sturdy build, even as an infant. Thomas was a devoted father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Jacob when he cried, singing lullabies in his deep rumbling voice. Hannah healed from the birth and found that motherhood came more naturally than she had expected. She loved this tiny person with a fierce protectiveness that surprised her. And watching Thomas with Jacob, seeing the gentleness with which he handled their son, only made her love her husband more. That spring, when Jacob was 2 months old, Hannah received a letter. It was from her younger sister, Emma, who had somehow tracked Hannah down. The letter was brief but emotional. Emma had married a good man and moved to Colorado. She wanted to see Hannah, wanted to make sure she was all right. She did not blame Hannah for leaving, understood why she had to go. Hannah cried when she read the letter, relief and guilt and joy all tangled together. Thomas held her and Jacob both, letting her cry it out. "Right back," he said gently. She needs to know you are safe and happy, and maybe, when Jacob is a bit older, we could visit. Colorado is not so far. Hannah did write back, pouring out everything that had happened since she left Ohio. She told Emma about Thomas, about their life in the mountains, about little Jacob. She sent a sketch of the cabin and invited Emma to visit when she could. Emma's response came a month later, full of joy and relief. She would come visit in the summer, bringing her husband. She was so happy Hannah had found love and safety. In July, Emma and her husband, Robert, made the journey to Evanston and then up to the cabin. The reunion between the sisters was tearful and beautiful. Emma, now 19, had grown into a confident young woman. She loved Thomas immediately, calling him the brother I always wished I had, and was enchanted with baby Jacob. Over the course of their week-long visit, the sisters were able to talk through everything that had happened. Emma told Hannah that their father had drunk himself to death 2 years ago, and their mother had moved in with a cousin in Pennsylvania. Neither knew where Hannah was, and Emma had no intention of telling them. "You deserve your peace," Emma said firmly. "You deserve this life you have built." The visit healed something in Hannah, closed a wound she had not realized was still bleeding. When Emma and Robert left, promising to visit again soon and to write regularly, Hannah felt lighter. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Jacob grew from baby to toddler to little boy, running wild through the mountains with his father, learning to track and hunt and respect the wilderness. Hannah's garden expanded year by year, becoming a source of pride and abundance. She started preserving food, making jams and pickles that Thomas would trade in town. Her drawings became more skilled, and she started selling some through the general store, bringing in a small income of her own. Thomas's trapping business prospered. He became known throughout the region as a fair dealer with prime furs. He hired a young man named Samuel to help with the trap lines, giving him more time to spend with his family. When Jacob was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, and in the spring, she delivered a healthy baby girl. They named her Mary, after Thomas's mother. Mary was a calmer baby than Jacob had been, content to watch the world with serious eyes. Life in the cabin was full and rich. There were hard times, of course, the winter when Thomas broke his leg and Hannah had to manage everything alone for weeks, the summer when a fire threatened the mountains and they had to evacuate to town, the sickness that took little Jacob when he was 6 and scared them all terribly until he recovered. But through it all, Hannah and Thomas faced everything together, their love growing deeper with each challenge overcome. Hannah's anxiety never fully disappeared, but it became manageable, became something she knew how to work with, rather than something that controlled her. She had her tools, the river stone, the breathing exercises, the sketching that calmed her mind. And she had Thomas, always steady, always patient, always reminding her of her strength. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Hannah back to the spot where he had proposed. They left the children with Mrs. Crawford in town for the day and rode out to their bench beneath the cottonwood tree. The tree had grown significantly in those 10 years, its branches spreading wide. 10 years, Thomas said, taking Hannah's hand. 10 years since you said yes and changed my life forever. You changed mine too, Hannah said, leaning into his shoulder. I was so broken when we met, Thomas. I did not think I would ever be whole again. You were never broken, Thomas said firmly. Wounded, yes, but never broken. And look at you now. Look at the woman you have become. Hannah thought about it. She thought about how she could speak up for herself now, how she managed the household and raised 2 children, how she could walk through Evanston with her head held high. She thought about the business she had built selling her art, about the friends she had made, about the life she had created. She thought about how she laughed easily now, how she slept peacefully most nights, how she had learned to trust not just Thomas, but herself. I never thanked you properly, Hannah said, for being patient with me, for giving me time to heal, time to grow. Mrs. Crawford said I needed someone patient, and you said you had all the patience in the world for me. That is what made this possible, Thomas. Your patience, your unwavering belief in me. Thomas turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands the way he had so many times over the years. It was not hard to be patient with you, Hannah. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done. You were worth waiting for. You are worth everything. He kissed her then, deep and sweet. and Hannah kissed him back with all the love and gratitude in her heart. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I want to grow old with you in those mountains," Hannah said. "I want to watch our children grow and have children of their own. I want a lifetime of sunrises from that porch, of gardens in the spring and snow in the winter. I want every day with you." "Then that is what we will have," Thomas promised. "A lifetime together, one day at a time." They stayed at the bench until sunset, talking and laughing and simply being together. When they finally rode back to town to collect their children, Hannah felt a profound sense of contentment. She had run from Ohio all those years ago thinking she was running away from something terrible. But really, she had been running toward this, toward love, toward home, toward the man who had seen her wounds and loved her anyway, the man who had all the patience in the world for her. The years continued to unfold in a tapestry of moments, both ordinary and extraordinary. Jacob grew into a tall, strong boy with his father's build and his mother's artistic eye. He could track a deer through dense forest and then sketch its likeness with remarkable accuracy. Mary was quieter, more studious, but with a fierce determination that reminded everyone of her mother. Both children adored their parents and thrived in the mountain environment. When Jacob was 10 and Mary was 7, Hannah became pregnant again, a surprise that delighted the whole family. This time, she delivered twin boys, Daniel and Joseph, who were loud and rambunctious from the moment they entered the world. Thomas joked that they had their hands full now, but his eyes shone with joy every time he looked at his family. The cabin had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family. Thomas, with help from Samuel and some other men from town, built an addition with 2 more bedrooms and a larger living space. Hannah designed the layout, incorporating windows to maximize the mountain views she loved so much. Emma and Robert visited regularly, bringing their own 3 children. The cousins would run wild through the mountains while the adults caught up on life. Emma and Hannah's bond remained strong, the shared trauma of their past serving as a foundation for deep understanding and love. Hannah's art business grew beyond what she had imagined. A merchant from Denver saw her work in Evanston and offered to sell her pieces in his gallery. Hannah's sketches and paintings of mountain life became popular, and she began receiving commissions from people across the West. The extra income allowed them to make improvements to the homestead and save for the children's futures. Thomas's reputation as a trapper and guide also grew. He started leading hunting expeditions for wealthy Easterners who wanted to experience the wilderness. He was always selective about his clients, refusing to work with anyone who did not respect the land and animals. His integrity earned him respect throughout the territory. On a warm June evening when Jacob was 15, the family sat on the expanded porch watching the sunset. Jacob and Mary were helping their younger brothers carve wooden figures, a skill Thomas had taught them. Hannah sat in a rocking chair, sketching the scene, trying to capture this perfect moment. Father, Jacob said, looking up from his carving. "Samuel says you were thinking about retiring from trapping. Is that true?" Thomas glanced at Hannah, a smile playing at his lips. "Thinking about it. I'm not getting any younger, and there are other things I want to do with my time. Maybe focus more on the guiding, maybe help your mother with her art business, maybe just spend more time with you kids before you are all grown and gone." "I am never leaving," 6-year-old Daniel declared. "I am going to live here forever." "Me too," Joseph echoed, as he usually did. Everyone laughed. "You say that now," Hannah said gently. "But someday you will want to see the world, have adventures of your own, and that will be all right. Your father and I want you to have choices, to find your own paths." "Did you have choices, Mother?" Mary asked. She was old enough now to know some of her mother's story, though Hannah had spared her the darkest details. "Not at first," Hannah said honestly, "but then I made a choice to leave, to seek something better. And that choice led me here, to this family, to this life. So yes, eventually I had choices. And I chose this. Every day I choose this." Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. Even after all these years, his touch still sent warmth through her. "And I choose you," he said softly. "Every day." That fall, Jacob started courting a girl from town, a sweet young woman named Sarah, who was not intimidated by the mountains or the isolation. Hannah watched her eldest son navigate the complicated terrain of young love and felt a pang of bittersweet pride. He was growing up, finding his own way, just as he should. "He is good with her," Thomas observed one evening after Jacob and Sarah had visited for dinner. "Respectful, patient. I wonder where he learned that." Hannah smiled and leaned into her husband's side. "From the best man I know." The winter that year was particularly harsh, with heavy snows that isolated them for weeks at a time. But the cabin was warm and well stocked, and the family made the most of the forced togetherness. They played games, told stories, and worked on projects. Thomas taught the twins basic tracking skills, using animal prints in the snow around the cabin. Mary worked on her reading, making her way through every book in the house. Jacob carved an elaborate jewelry box for Sarah, sanding and oiling the wood until it gleamed. Hannah spent those long winter evenings sketching her family, filling sketchbook after sketchbook with memories. Thomas reading to the twins by firelight, Mary concentrating on her embroidery, Jacob's strong young hands shaping wood. These ordinary moments felt precious, worth preserving. One particularly cold night, when the wind howled outside and the children were all asleep, Hannah and Thomas sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Hannah had been quiet all evening, and Thomas finally asked what was on her mind. "I was thinking about how afraid I used to be," Hannah said, "how I could barely function some days, how everything felt threatening. And now, look at us. Look at this life we have built. Sometimes it feels like a dream, like I will wake up and still be that terrified girl in Ohio." "But you are not her anymore," Thomas said. "You grew beyond her. That takes courage, Hannah. That takes strength." "It took you," Hannah corrected. "It took your patience and love. I could not have done this alone." Thomas pulled her closer. "You are stronger than you give yourself credit for. I just gave you a safe place to discover that strength. The courage was always in you." Hannah thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe the strength had always been there, buried beneath fear and trauma, waiting for the right conditions to emerge. Thomas had provided those conditions: safety, patience, unwavering love. But she had done the hard work of healing, of choosing to trust, of building a new life. "We did it together," she finally said. "That is what makes it work. We are a team." "The best team," Thomas agreed, kissing the top of her head. Spring arrived eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, the streams ran high, and Hannah's garden came back to life. She spent happy hours planting and tending, with the twins helping in their enthusiastic if chaotic way. Jacob and Sarah announced their engagement, planning a fall wedding. Mary declared she wanted to be a teacher, inspired by the schoolmarm in Evanston. Life moved forward in its natural rhythm, seasons passing, children growing, love deepening. Thomas did retire from trapping that year, passing his best trap lines on to Samuel and focusing on his family and the occasional guiding work. He found he enjoyed the slower pace, the ability to be present for every moment with his wife and children. One summer afternoon, Thomas and Hannah took a rare moment alone, hiking up to a high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in riotous colors. They had not been alone together, really alone, in months. They spread a blanket and lay back, watching clouds drift overhead. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked. "Choosing this life? It has not been easy, living out here, raising children in such isolation." "Not once," Hannah said firmly. "Not for a single second. This life, this family, you, it is everything I never knew to hope for." "Do you regret it?" "Never," Thomas said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Hannah Novak. You and our children, this life we built together. I am the luckiest man alive." They made love there in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and mountain air, as passionate and tender as they had been on their wedding night. Years and children had not diminished their desire for each other. If anything, it had deepened, layered now with friendship and respect and history. Jacob and Sarah's wedding was a beautiful affair held in Evanston in October, with half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a dress Hannah had helped her sew, and Jacob looked impossibly grown up in his suit. When they exchanged vows, Hannah cried happy tears, remembering her own wedding day 15 years earlier. The young couple moved into a cabin they built on the edge of Thomas and Hannah's property, close enough for support but far enough for privacy. Sarah adapted to mountain life quickly, and Hannah enjoyed having another woman nearby. Within a year, Sarah was pregnant, making Thomas and Hannah giddy with excitement about becoming grandparents. Mary, now 15, showed no interest in courting, much to her parents' relief. She was focused on her studies, determined to attend the teaching college in Laramie. Thomas and Hannah supported her dreams, even knowing it would mean she would leave the mountains eventually. The twins, now 10, were growing like weeds and getting into everything. They were inseparable, always together, always plotting some adventure or mischief. They had their father's size and their mother's creativity, a sometimes dangerous combination. On Hannah's 40th birthday, Thomas gave her a special gift, a beautiful wooden easel he had built himself, complete with a storage drawer for supplies and adjustable height. "So you can paint as well as sketch," he explained. "You've been talking about trying oils for years. Now you can." Hannah was overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness, by the hours of work the easel represented. She threw her arms around her husband's neck. "Thank you, for this, for everything, for seeing who I could become even when I could not see it myself." "That is what love does," Thomas said simply. "It sees potential, it believes, it waits." And he had waited, had been patient when she needed patience, steadfast when she needed stability, gentle when she needed care. And in doing so, he had helped her transform from a frightened girl into a confident woman, from someone running away to someone who had found home. Years continued to pass. Jacob and Sarah gave them 3 grandchildren, 2 girls and a boy, all of whom were frequent visitors to the mountain cabin. Mary finished her education and took a teaching position in Evanston, boarding with Mrs. Crawford during the week and coming home on weekends. The twins eventually began to differentiate, Daniel becoming more interested in ranching while Joseph showed talent for working with wood like his father. Hannah's hair began to show silver strands, and Thomas's dark hair lightened with gray. His body bore the marks of a hard life, old injuries that ached in cold weather, but he remained strong and capable. Hannah's hands, once so scarred and shaky, were now steady and sure, capable of creating beauty with pencil and brush. They added a studio onto the cabin for Hannah's art, a space with large windows facing east to catch the morning light. She spent hours there, painting scenes of mountain life, portraits of her family, landscapes that captured the wild beauty of Wyoming. Her work hung in galleries across the West now, and she had earned enough money to help fund Mary's education and contribute to Jacob's growing ranch. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Hannah with a trip. He had arranged for Emma and Robert to watch the twins, and he took Hannah on a journey back to Evanston, to that bench beneath the cottonwood tree where it all began. The tree was massive now, its trunk thick and gnarled, its branches spreading wide. The bench had been replaced several times over the years, but it still sat in the same spot. They sat together, hand in hand, looking out at the town that had brought them together. 25 years, Hannah marveled, a quarter of a century. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you walked me home from that first dance. Other times, it feels like we have always been together. "I know what you mean," Thomas said. "I can barely remember what life was like before you. It feels incomplete, like the story had not really started yet." "Do you remember what I said to you that night, when you proposed?" Hannah asked. "You said yes," Thomas grinned. "That is the part I remember most clearly." Hannah laughed. "Before that, I said you had shown me I was more than my fear, more than my past. That is still true, Thomas. Every day you still show me that. You still believe in me, still support my dreams, still love me through the hard days. That is easy to do when you are married to the most incredible woman in the world," Thomas said. "Hannah, you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, a family, a home, a love that sustains me through everything. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Hannah said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose it all again, choose you again, in every lifetime." They renewed their vows right there beneath the cottonwood tree, with only the mountains as witnesses. Thomas promised again to be patient, to be steady, to love her with everything he had. Hannah promised to trust, to be brave, to build a life alongside him for as long as they both should live. And when they kissed, it was with the passion of new lovers and the depth of old friends, 25 years of history and love binding them together. As they rode back to the cabin that evening, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a terrified girl fleeing Ohio, to a woman who had built a life of meaning and purpose in the Wyoming mountains, from someone who could barely look a man in the eye to a wife, mother, grandmother, and artist, from broken to whole, from fearful to brave, from alone to deeply, completely loved. And through it all, Thomas had been there. Patient when she needed patience, strong when she needed strength, gentle when she needed care. He had waited for her to heal, believed in her when she could not believe in herself, loved her through every stage of her transformation. He had proven, day after day, year after year, that he had all the patience in the world for her. The mountains rose around them as they climbed toward home, eternal and unchanging. But Hannah and Thomas were forever changed, shaped by each other and by the love they had built together. And as the sun set over the peaks, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. At home, the family gathered for a celebration dinner. Jacob and Sarah were there with the grandchildren, Mary had come up from town, and the twins had prepared a special meal. The cabin was filled with laughter and love, with the next generation already learning the values Thomas and Hannah had worked so hard to embody. As Hannah looked around the table at her family, at the life she and Thomas had created, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. This was what healing looked like. This was what love could build when given patience and time. This was home. Thomas caught her eye across the table and smiled, that same transforming smile that had captured her heart 25 years ago. And Hannah smiled back, pouring all her love and gratitude into that simple expression. They did not need words anymore. They could communicate volumes in a look, in a touch, in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. After dinner, when the children and grandchildren had all gone home or to bed, Thomas and Hannah stood on their porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The mountains were black silhouettes against the purple twilight, and the air was cool and pine-scented. "Another good day," Thomas said, wrapping his arms around Hannah from behind. "The best," Hannah agreed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Thank you for today, for the trip to town, for renewing our vows, for everything always." "My pleasure," Thomas murmured into her hair. "Here is to another 25 years. And another after that," Hannah added. "As many as we get," Thomas said, "every single one." They stood there until the stars were bright overhead, until the chill drove them inside to the warmth of their home. And as they prepared for bed, moving around each other with the ease of long practice, Hannah thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about patience and love and the healing power of both. She thought about how lucky she was to have found this man, this life, this happiness. In the darkness, Thomas pulled her close, and Hannah felt the steady beat of his heart against her back. This was safety. This was love. This was home. And she had waited a lifetime to find it, had survived terrible things to get here, and it was worth every moment of fear and struggle. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Thomas whispered back. "Always have, always will." And wrapped in his arms, in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by the mountains that had become a refuge, Hannah Novak slept peacefully, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The journey from that terrified girl in Ohio to this content woman in Wyoming had been long and difficult, but she had made it. With Thomas's patience and her own courage, with time and love and unwavering belief, she had made it home. The story of Hannah and Thomas Novak became something of a legend in Evanston and the surrounding areas. People would talk about the mountain man who had fallen for the frightened girl from the butcher shop, about how his patience had given her the space to heal, about how their love had transformed them both. Young couples would seek their advice, asking how they had built such a strong marriage, and the answer was always the same: patience, trust, and a commitment to face everything together. As the years turned into decades, the family continued to grow and thrive. More grandchildren arrived, and eventually great-grandchildren. The mountain cabin saw generations of Novaks, each one learning the values of hard work, respect for nature, and the importance of patience and love. Hannah's art became increasingly valuable, with pieces hanging in museums and private collections. Thomas's guiding business was continued by Daniel, who had his father's gift for reading the wilderness. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the mountain cabin for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the expanded homestead, spilling out onto the porch and into the yard. Hannah, now 72, her hair silver and her face lined with age, looked around at this incredible gathering and felt her heart might burst with joy. Thomas, now 74, stood beside her, his hair white and his body showing his age, but still strong, still steady. He looked down at his wife with the same love in his eyes that had been there 50 years ago when they had first met. "We did good," he said simply, gesturing at their assembled family. "We did very good," Hannah agreed. Jacob, now 52 and gray at the temples himself, stood to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "who taught us what real love looks like, who showed us that patience and kindness can heal the deepest wounds, who built a legacy not just of family, but of values that will carry forward through generations. Happy 50th anniversary, Mother and Father. We love you." The family erupted in cheers and applause. Hannah felt tears stream down her face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. She looked at Thomas and saw his eyes were wet too. 50 years, she said, the same wonder in her voice that had been there at 25 years. "Can you believe it?" "Best 50 years of my life," Thomas said, pulling her close despite his creaky joints. "And I would do it all again, Hannah, every single day." "So would I," Hannah said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "They said I needed someone patient, and you said you had all the patience in the world for me. That changed everything, Thomas. That saved my life." "You saved your own life," Thomas corrected gently, a conversation they had had many times over the years. "I just gave you a safe place to do it." "We saved each other," Hannah said firmly. "That is the truth of it. We saved each other." As the party continued around them, as their family celebrated the love that had started it all, Hannah and Thomas stood together, hands clasped, looking out at the mountains that had been witness to their entire journey. From that first meeting on a moonlit night, through courtship and marriage, through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through challenges and triumphs, through 50 years of life lived fully and together. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in colors that Hannah had tried to capture in her art thousands of times, but never quite managed to replicate. Some beauty was too vast, too perfect to be contained. Like their love, it could only be experienced, lived, felt in the depths of the soul. "Thank you," Hannah said quietly, the words inadequate but heartfelt, "for everything, for patience, for love, for this life." "Thank you," Thomas echoed, "for trusting me, for choosing me, for this family, for everything." They kissed as the sun disappeared behind the peaks, as their family cheered and whistled, as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. And in that moment, Hannah felt the completion of a circle that had begun 50 years ago with a frightened girl and a patient mountain man. She had been broken once, shattered by trauma and fear. But with time and patience and love, she had become whole again. Not perfect, never without scars, but whole, strong, happy, home, and beside her, always and forever, was the man who had promised he had all the patience in the world for her. The man who had kept that promise every single day for 50 years. The man who had shown her that love was not about finding someone who made you forget your past, but about finding someone who would help you heal from it. As the celebration continued into the night, as the family shared stories and laughter beneath the stars, as the mountains stood eternal watch over the scene, Hannah and Thomas sat together on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool evening air, wrapped in 50 years of love and memories and commitment. And they knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime together, that this was what happily ever after really looked like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and deep and lasting. Built on patience and trust, on countless small moments of choosing each other, on the unwavering belief that together they could weather any storm. The mountains stood eternal, and so did their love. And that was the greatest story of all.